This is Kenny Tan. Welcome to Real Estate License in 14 Weeks. This is episode 6 of Starting from Zero, Real Property. Now, if you have not watched episode 5, I would encourage you to watch episode 5 before you watch episode 6. Today, we're going to talk about real property. Real property consists of 3 components: land, fixtures, and appurtenant. Land is land. Everybody knows what a land is. Well, land is something that you're stepping on. Okay, that's one of the components of real property. Now, the tricky thing about land is that certain things that are under the ground, pretty much everything under the ground is part of the land. So if you own a piece of land, anything that goes from the surface of the property to the center of the earth, you own that. You own that piece of land. Sometimes beneath the land, you may have oil or minerals. So with respect to minerals that are not mined, I mean, they still stay within the ground. You did not spend any money or effort to bring the mines or minerals from the ground to the surface of the earth. That mines or mineral is what we call real property. But once it's mined to the surface, whatever that used to be real property is now personal property. The next category of real property is what we call fixtures, that which is affixed to the land. For example, blind. See, a blind is usually something that you install on the window for window covering, or a curtain. Now, there might be some argument as to whether or not a curtain is real or personal property. Well, it depends on how it's fixed. There are curtains that has rings. So in other words, they are not meant to be permanently fixed to the window. You can actually remove them, take them to the cleaner, and wash. If something is readily removable, it becomes a personal property, not a fixture. On the other hand, a blind, some people might argue that blind is something that might be closer to a fixture, because once you fix it, you don't always remove a blind. Okay, and is a stove a fixture or personal property? Is the stove part of the real property, or is it personal property? Well, it depends on how it's attached. Most stoves are attached to the wall, but can be easily removable. There are homeowners who will consider the stove to be personal property because it can be moved from one home to another and can be removed from the wall very easily. What about a built-in refrigerator? A built-in refrigerator is more likely to be a real property, a fixture, because normally when you install a built-in refrigerator, you have no intention of moving it around. It's basically, there is an opening on the wall that is cut to the right size to fit the built-in refrigerator. That's how you install it. And once it's installed, it's there permanently. Okay. Now, what about the ceiling tiles? You know, like a T-bar ceiling. When you work in an office, you look upstairs, you look up there, you see the ceiling tiles. Now, ceiling tiles, even though it is actually sort of floating, it's not fixed to anything, because the ceiling tiles actually rest on the T-bars, and it's not nailed to anything. If you poke it, you'll be able to lift the ceiling tiles. But why is the ceiling tile considered a fixture? Because a ceiling tile is normally installed and then left there permanently. It is rarely that an owner would install a ceiling tile and have the intention of moving it to another building. That's why a ceiling tile is part of a fixture. For exam purposes, I would like you to remember the acronym MARIA. MARIA stands for M-A-R-I-A. Well, there are 5 factors, M-A-R-I-A, that a court used to determine if something is a fixture or not. Number 1 is called the manner of annexation. The first letter is an M, the first letter of Maria. manner of annexation. Now, if it's something that can be easily disconnected from something that is fixed to the wall, for example, you walk into a very expensive home, say for example a $5 million home, and if you look on the ceiling, sometimes you see some really pretty, some very, very expensive chandelier. So are chandeliers a fixture or personal property? It depends. If it's one of those chandeliers, at the end of it, it is anchored to the ceiling. In other words, you go through the ceiling and then there's anchor behind the ceiling that hold the chandelier in place. Typically, that will be part of the property, part of the house. That's what we call a fixture. But on the other hand, there are chandeliers that are not anchored to the ceiling like that. For example, you may have chandelier that has a hook at the end of it. What's the purpose of the hook? So that the hook can go into a ring, and then if you want to remove it, you can easily remove it because it rests on the ring. Whereas a chandelier that is fixed to the wall, it is more difficult to remove it. I mean, that's fixed to the ceiling. So because of that, whether or not it's a fixture, it will depend on how it is annexed or connected or fixed to the surface of the property. Now, the second letter is what we call A. The second letter in the name Maria is called adaptability. Something that can be, that is reusable somewhere else. Some people might argue a blind that is of standard width and standard height may not be a fixture. It could be personal property. Now, in a standard residential purchase agreement, it is not uncommon to see that wall covering, which includes the blinds and the curtains, are by agreement made part of the house that's being sold. It is because sometimes that is a gray area. It is better that the parties decide whether it comes with the house or don't come with the house, or else there might be an argument whether or not a blind is a fixture or not. The more adaptable something is, such as a washer and a dryer, at the back of the washer and dryer you got some standard connection, and they are very adaptable. Whether you install it on house number A or house number B, the method of installation is the same. That's why typically washers and dryers are not included in the residential purchase agreement. So that's what we call adaptability. The third letter in the name Maria is R. It's called relationship of the parties. Whenever there's a dispute between a tenant and a landlord as to whether or not something is a fixture, the court look at the relationship of the parties. Is this person a landlord or is this person a tenant? The law tends to favor the tenant. So if the judge cannot decide if something is a fixture or not, based on other factors, the judge will look at the relationship of the parties. Now, in the case of a buyer and a seller, the judge tends to favor the buyer more so than the seller. If the judge cannot decide if something is a fixture or not based on the rest of the factors, the judge will favor the buyer. The fourth letter is the letter I. It's called intention of the person who installed the part. If the person does not intend for it to be used anywhere else. For example, I gave you a very good example, which was the ceiling tiles. It's not fixed to anything. It is just a pieces of material that sits on the T-bar. Now, even though it's not really fixed to anything, but because the intention of the person who installed the ceiling tile is for it to be there to be permanent and not to be used anywhere else, it is considered to be a fixture. It is very rare that when a person installs the ceiling tiles, they intend to reuse it. It's usually just left there permanently. Now, the last letter in Maria is A. By agreement, the parties can actually change a fixture into a personal property or a personal property into a fixture. For example, in a typical residential agreement, things like refrigerator, washer, dryer, they are personal property. By agreement, you can make it part of the purchase contract, can make it part of the real property. Just like, for example, a faucet, in the bathroom. Some homes that you have seen before, they have really beautiful faucets, and the owner really liked the faucet, even though faucets are typically considered to be fixtures. That's part of the house when you sell. Nobody actually consider a faucet to be a personal property. But if it's a very expensive faucet, the seller may negotiate with the buyer to allow the seller to remove the expensive faucet from the purchase contract. So there you have it, Maria, M-A-R-I-A. In exams, if you are asked, and this is really an easy question, what are the 5 factors the court will use to determine if something is a fixture or not? It's just Maria, manner of annexation, adaptability, relationship of the parties, intention of the parties, and agreement. Okay, there you have it. What is a trade fixture? A trade fixture is technically a fixture. Now it deals with commercial tenants' fixtures. For example, a restaurant owner may have certain things in the kitchen that he installed, like a hood in the kitchen. Those commercial hoods that will suck out all this smoke and air and that you created by cooking meals in the kitchen. Now, for example, a hood, which is a commercial grade, it is installed into the building as a fixture, but it is a special type of fixture. It is an exception. A trade fixture is technically a personal property and not real property because the law says so. If something is identified as a trade fixture, that in this case a hood, in a commercial kitchen of a restaurant, the law allows the tenant to remove the hood when he leaves the property. And that's why a trade fixture is a personal property and not real property in the sense that it can be removed from the kitchen or any other types of fixture. For example, you go to Chipotle, you see all these things that they install as part of the business. Those are what we call trade fixture. Now, trade fixture are personal property. The last component of real property is what we call appurtenant. What does the word appurtenant really mean? It means comes with it. It is a right that comes with the property. It is something that is more conceptual. It's not something that's concrete that you can step on it, you can touch it or anything. No, it's a conceptual thing. It's a right that comes with real property. For example, an easement. What is an easement? An easement is a property right. So you have 2 pieces of property. Property A, which is next to a street, and then you got property B, which is behind property A. Well, how does the owner in property B get to his property? Well, the owner of property B, in order for him to get to his own property, he has to go through property A. And there's usually a little path on the side of the property in front of him, in this case, property A. So basically, that little strip of land to the side of property A gives property B the passageway to go to his property. So in order for B to have access to the property, B needs to own this easement. So when a buyer buys property B, buyer that buys the property B also has the easement right. So that easement right is transferred to the new owner. And that's why easement is part of the real property. Now, the second type of appurtenant is what we call water rights. In Central Valley, like in Fresno, all of those agricultural cities, often when you buy an agricultural land, it is not uncommon for the buyer to also own the water rights. Now, what is water right? Water right is the right of a property owner to go into someone else's property or to have water in someone else's property be conveyed to his own property because he owns that water right. So that's part of the real property when you buy a piece of agricultural land. The last thing in appurtenant is what we call stock in water company or water company stock. See, in Central Valley, when you buy a piece of property, sometimes that deed that you receive when you buy the property, you also own stock that the previous owner transferred to you via the deed. It's called stock that you own with the water company. Typically, this private water company will provide water to your land because you own certain stock. So there you have it. Those are the three components of real property. But before I leave you, there are a few other concepts I want to convey to you. Number one is what we call a riparian right. What is a riparian right? If you own a piece of property in Central Valley, right in the middle of your property, there might be a stream of water that flow through your property. Now, if you own a piece of property, and if there is a water course that runs through your property, do you have the right to use the water in the water course? Yes, you do. Do you have an unlimited right to use the water in the water course? The answer is no, because many other property owners share the use of the water in the water course. Everybody has the right to use the water course wherever the water course passes through their land. So you will have reasonable use, not unlimited use, but reasonable use of the water in the water course that runs through your property. We call that riparian right. Another kind of water right is called littoral right. Littoral right simply deals with right to use certain water next to the sea or the lake. Riparian, you think about water course. Littoral, you think about sea or the lake. Just the different sources of water, but they both give the property owners the right to have reasonable use of this water. Lastly, it's called appropriation. Now, when it comes to appropriation, it has to do with the power of the state to use any water that runs below your property. It's called the underground water. Any water that you are not using, the government, or we call that state, S-T-A-T-E. State is the same thing as government. Those two words are used interchangeably. In exam, you either look for the word state or you look for the word government. So appropriation deals with the government's right to have reasonable use of any water that you're not using that flows under your property. So that's it for episode 6, real property. Episode 6 is the last video on chapter 1. So when we go to chapter 2, it will start with episode 7. If you like my video, please give me a thumbs up. I would really appreciate it. If you want to receive future notification of new releases of my videos, all you need to do is to subscribe, and don't forget, click the bell. That way you will receive first notification as soon as the video is released.